Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk Teaching, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundram, and I'll be sitting down with the industry veterans to dive deeper into the topics that business winning professionals like you and me can use to help grow your skills and your business. Today's guest is Kathryn Potter. Kathryn is a content geek who believes in the value of reusable content to streamline the bid response process. She's convinced that all the content can be made reusable on some level and that you don't need to have a fancy system to make it work. 100% agreed there, Kathryn. It's more about process and engagement and leveraging what you have already. She's been involved in bids and proposals since 2004, that's close to 16, 17 years, and has been a proposal coordinator, bid manager, freelancer, and consultant at various points in her career. Outside of her work, she enjoys getting involved in all sorts of outdoor adventures with husband, daughters, and the dog. More about Kathryn and Kathryn's story is available in Scribble Talk episode number 101. So before we invite Kathryn to Scribble Talk, the topic that will be touched today is developing content using feedback from submission. So who can talk about this other than Kathryn? Welcome, Kathryn, to Scribble Talk Teaching.
Thanks, Pascal. Great to be here again. I didn't realize the last one was number 101. Gosh.
Yeah. Today we are, I don't know, at this time of recording, we are 134, Kathryn. So yeah, it's good. It's good. Kathryn, the topic, developing content using feedback from submission. Before we get to that topic, Kathryn, let's go to the very basics of content. What do you think is content in the bidding world?
So content in the bidding world is absolutely anything that you use to put into your bid responses, whether it's the date your company was started, your ISO 14001 certificate, a diagram on organizational management. It is everything that goes into that response document.
Interesting. So obviously, as you mentioned, we have different types of documents, and these documents exist in different formats. At a very basic level, as you rightly said, we can save the past bids in one folder. Is there any better way of saving this content?
So I think this is where I start arguing with people usually when they tell me, oh, but we don't have anything reusable. It's all bespoke. And I go, yes, but that proposal you wrote last week, you copied and pasted out of the proposal you wrote the week before. Therefore, you're reusing content. I think the best way to store your content in the beginning, a bid library makes sense because that's what you started with. But ideally, you need a library, a folder system with no more than 3 levels of searchable folders. And you need to split them out by the parts of things that you have to answer. So maybe you get a lot of HR questions. Maybe you get a lot of technical questions. Maybe it's about your products and solutions. So you need to call that top folder product and solution or company information. And under that, you put your insurances or widget ABC or, you put small pieces of information or longer pieces of information about specific things into those folders so that it's a bit like going to a catalog card system in library. And you flick through it and you can find, that's the piece of information I need on this, or that's the piece of information I need on something else.
Wow.
Rather than searching through this entire last 4 bids or 10 bids or 400 bids you've written for information that's very similar but not necessarily the same or what you want.
Perfect. So at the very simplest form, at least store it by bid library, but the next best form is at least have it like 3 levels of content that you can go and dig deep on those content. So is there any kind of what's the right word, like curation of content? Is there anything that we could do for faster, efficient way?
So if you're wanting to curate your content and really manage it nicely, what you should do on the most basic level is have some sort of spreadsheet or index somewhere that says with a list of what you've got. So that you've got a place to go and look and say, oh, instead of searching through all these folders, have I got a piece of information on XYZ? And yes, I know it feels like an awful lot of admin to keep some sort of document like that alive, But basically, it serves as part of your process if you're doing it in a simple environment where you don't have automation tools and workflows. You've simply got a document that says, this is the document name, company registration, for example. It says what it's called, it says where to find it, when it was last updated and when it needs to be updated again, and who owns it. That's the most simple way of curating it and managing it, because then you can start feeding this into a calendar that says, oh, guess what? It's March. I need to check and see whether our insurance documents are valid. Or, oh, maybe we've got some new carbon statistics. You know, these sorts of things have regular updates. And you can use this base document to populate other things to keep you going. There are now amazing tools that you can use, you know, Trello boards and Jira and all sorts of other things where you can actually create workflows, and SharePoint, of course, that will remind you to do things on a regular basis. But you want to keep it simple. And the curation of content is always about, is it up to date? How do we work a process to keep us up to date?
That's brilliant, Kathryn. And not necessarily companies tend to have a content team or a knowledge manager, etc. It normally falls on the lap of a proposal manager who's already having 3 bids to go this month. In addition to that, she needs to keep her own job effective, so she goes and stays and does it. What advice would you give this person there is no knowledge manager, content person? Yeah, she would need to completely create the curation. When do you think they have to do it?
The more I look at this, the more I think that proposal people need to sit down with somebody higher than them in the organization and say, look, to make me more efficient, I need to spend half a day a week or half a day a month or a day a month. I need this time just for this particular administrative efficiency function to continuously improve and develop on what we do. I think that a lot of organizations miss this continuous improvement thing. We talk about it a lot. I've got a background in working with IT outsourcing and IT companies. And everything there works on this agile, continuous improvement, continuous development model. But other sectors are not necessarily as aware, so it can become a bit static. But the proposal team needs to go and say, look, if we need to put this into our process. It's an admin function that's important. We need to record it. We need to know what's going on. It makes us better. It's about building it into the process, because I do feel that bids and proposals, when we originally started with bids and proposals, people saw, oh, we get this thing that comes in the door. Oops, it lands on our desk. Oops, its deadline is tomorrow. Oops, we better do something. And we're so busy finishing this one, popping it out the door and starting the next one, that we never stop to breathe and actually look at how well we did or didn't do and take that into account the next time we do something, which would then feed back into building better content or finding a way of making it more efficient and saying, we need this time to review something or to update something or to work on something. And over time, you can use metrics from that. Well, it didn't take me 4 hours to look for something this time because it was already written up and I knew it was valid, and I didn't need to waste Joe Blogs in purchasing's department 6 hours to find out how long it takes us to pay invoices. We know we pay all our invoices in 31 days or whatever it is. Having seen a few very random questions come through lately.
Wow, that's very powerful what you just said now, Kathryn. I mean, like, whether don't just churn proposals from one to the other. Take some time out to understand, okay, this is what we submitted now, and take some time even to go a little bit back to just understand what we submitted in the past. How can I improve it even further in the coming bids and stuff. That's super powerful. So I've just went and I've just created this high level library, and then as you rightly suggested, have an Excel spreadsheet like a what they call like a compliance matrix or something that it clearly lists down, hey, these are all the collateral, this is where I saved, and this is the last iteration on this thing. So how often from your experience do you think we need to refresh this library, or do we need to go for a big shebang on all the content, or do you think we need to do it in a phased way over the course of the year?
So I think that in an ideal world, we'd all love to do a big, spring clean of it. But that's never really going to happen because we have day jobs, and day jobs in general are proposal management, which, as we all know, doesn't take into account things like holidays and time off. So I think the best way to do it is a phased approach, and you need to start, looking at things that what day they renew on your insurances. A month before your insurances go, you need to chase somebody to say, hey, have we got our new insurances for next year? When will we have them? This is where to save them. And the other thing then that starts coming into play is, if we can, at the end of a submission, let's say we've sent off our submission, we're waiting around, or 3 weeks later they come back and they say, well, you came third and these are your scores. If you get scoring, great, take it away and use it. If you don't get scored on that submission, you need to say to them, you need to have a process that goes back and says to the client, we came third. Can you tell us what we could have done better? And can you tell us what we did really well? Because then you can take that again and feed it back into your library. So you can start doing things iteratively that way, and sort of in a phased approach. Well, whenever I get some feedback, I'll go and either copy in the comments that were made, to say, oh, you spoke about yourselves too much in this paragraph, or you didn't tell us what the benefit was. These sorts of things can go back in, and you can start improving as you go. But you also need to have some sort of phased approach where you can say, okay, well, this month we're going to work on social value. Next month we're going to work on human resource policies, or whatever it is, so that you're not overburdening yourself and trying to get everything done overnight. Because I think this is the other thing that people really do worry about. People have this idea that a content library, once you've got your content library, you never have to change it. And that is, so they often get paralyzed about where to start. How do I start? Where must I begin? What's the foundation block? And I go, no, it's not like that. You can literally take the last bid you used and say, okay, that's going to be my starting block. It is totally dynamic. It changes all the time. There's very little information other than your VAT number and your company registration number that are never going to change. And they might change if you change the company name, or there are things that can change, things that we sort of think never change. Press releases and things don't change, but we need to keep updated on what was the most recent one, or what have we said. And I think that often bid teams aren't aware of those sorts of things, and they need to link back to them. Your library doesn't only have to have pieces of information, and it can have links to central information, like maybe you have press releases, but you don't want to copy what marketing's already written and put them in your library. You actually want to link into marketing's database, because you should never be copying and pasting stuff across organizations. You want to have a golden source for everything. So again, these are things that, oh, guess what? It's the end of the month. Let me go and see if marketing's got any new press releases for us this month. Oh, let's make a quick link to them. Rather than going, oh my God, I don't know. Have we ever done anything about this? Oh, let's go and ask marketing. Marketing's busy doing something else and they don't have time to tell us. So little tricks like, oh, it's the third Friday of the month. This is the day that I spend half a day doing contacting marketing or contacting account managers. Have you got any good account stories for me this month to turn into a case study? These sorts of things can be ongoing and they can be updated. Once you've got a case study, you probably never need to update it again. Again, though, and this is where there's some tweaks in, and I'd love to do a content writing course somewhere along the line, or program one in. When we write things, you can write things in a way that means that you don't have to update them frequently because it's still valid. Things like saying the company was started in 2004 and has been providing a set of services. That's great, because 2004 is never going to change. But if I write the company was founded 16 years ago, every year I have to go and update the 16 years to 17 years to 18 years. Yes. And it's very easy to start having out-of-date content or missing something somewhere when you do those sorts of things. Wow. So, rather be, because the other thing is you can always tweak it. So let's say the thing you're responding to, you want to say 16 years ago, we started doing such and such. At least you know that your basic content says in 2004, we started providing rocket science services, and then next year you can say, because the way you want to create your answer using this basic building block of content that you've got, you can say 18 years ago we started doing this amazing thing, and then 12 years ago we did something else. But you could bespoke it rather for that particular response, but your base information is sound because it's got actual dates in it, which mean that you don't have to worry about using the wrong thing or recalculating how many years ago you did something.
I think, as you rightly said here, Kathryn, this is very powerful. I think rather than to get bogged down on starting an entire program of knowledge management, refresh, library, working group, and go with big thing, do it incremental, and you as a person or as a team, you know how to do bids. You have been doing it left, right, center, and make this as an overall added to the overall process. But companies does talk about lessons learned and other things like Kathryn. Do you think it's better? And that's we are coming to our topic now. And they do go back and say, hey, in this bid, our quality submission was the X, our pricing was this, we won this, we lost this, and this is the feedback we received. And they normally document, or I assume they document this in the thing, and it gets stored somewhere. Do you reckon that part of the content library that could also be something that could be part of this process?
I'm convinced it should be part of that process. And I'm convinced that if we expand that process to include those content, those comments that come through from our submission from the client, we can actually start to build better content. I think often that gets left out because people don't like hearing what they did wrong. People don't like to hear where they fell down. So 9 times out of 10, in my experience, when I speak to somebody about how successful they are, they don't refer to their quality submission, what they wrote about what they do. They'll most often say, oh, we lost on price.
Correct.
Price is easy to blame because it's a number. It's very, it's, I never get this right. I should know by now. Subjective or objective. It's very, subjective. Well, we were too expensive. They were too, it's very easy to say, well, we were too expensive or they were cheaper than us. When it comes to what you wrote about, what you do, evaluating whether you actually answered it correctly is much harder. And what can happen there, and this is where the content, where your feedback from your client is so interesting, they can say, oh, well, you spoke about this, but you didn't actually tell us what the benefit was.
Correct.
You keep telling us about your approach, and yes, we asked about your approach, but why is your approach any good? What will it give us? Maybe your competitor has the same approach, but they actually could say why it was important. So that's where you need to learn how to incorporate and ask for that sort of feedback, particularly in private sector bids where there is very often no requirement for the buyer to give you any sort of scoring.
100%, Kathryn. I think that's a very, very strong point. And we had a recent scenario just a month ago where this was a large framework that had 5 different lots. So the basic selection questionnaire for all these lots are exactly the same, and it's only the next phase the questions varied. What the interesting things about was they select, obviously, since there was a technical team that was involved, the questions were the same, but the evaluation team was different. The answers were the same, and the evaluation teams were different. What was fascinating was in lot 1 for the same response was scored 8, whereas in lot 2 the same response scored 4, lot 5. So there is also, as you rightly said, the subjective element on the quality side. What you perceive as the best collateral, and might not be perceived as the same way by this client, but not necessarily it's the same because it's because that person, what he or she digests the information, the outputs that he wants to have it in a certain format, etc. You might not have done it properly. So on that perspective as well, Kathryn, do you think we also need to, on a much wider scale, test out some of the collaterals on a different levels, and also, if possible, the question that you nicely asked in this topic, which is like, feedback from the submission, do you think it's worth getting? How much did we score on these individual sections? I know we normally get a higher score, like you scored 32 out of 40, or out of the overall quality, etc. In your experience, have you got any kind of what we call breakdown of the scores from the buyers?
So you find, or I've found, that the sort of the government and public procurement tends to be able to score you on each question, because they tell you, to score, you have to score an overall of a 2 or higher to make it through or something. So they will say, okay, questions 1 to 10, you scored a 2. And then they will tell you somewhere in your evaluation or in the guidance, to score a 2, you need to have said such and such, such and such and such and such. You need to be able to have provided these 3 kinds of pieces of information to score a 2. But you might not have scored a 3 because somebody else put something more compelling in. Or you may have scored a 3 and they also scored a 3. But the private sector doesn't do that very often. The proposals are often a lot more free form, and they don't necessarily give you any sort of way of scoring, which I think it's useful if you've got a very good relationship with your client. It's not so useful if you don't have such a great relationship, and this comes into the whole procurement life cycle and things. But I think what proposal people need to do is they need to ask for a breakdown on questions and sections, and they need to go back and say, please, can we sit down with you? We want to, and not put it from we lost and we want to know why we lost. Say, do you know what? We would like to know what we could do better to make our offering more compelling. Because I'm quite sure that purchasing people get really fed up with reading oodles and oodles of stuff that is just boring or doesn't tell them anything. And I do sometimes wonder if people in those situations, the evaluators, don't read the first couple of paragraphs and go, I'm brain dead already. I don't know what this is providing me with. I can't see the value in it. Skip to the next question. And I think a lot of it does come down to how we write our responses and how our content is put together to allow us to write our responses. But we need to ask for those. We need to ask those questions and understand where we are going wrong. And you might win a proposal or you might win a bid, but you have a really good relationship with that client, so they look beyond what you wrote. Your answer might not have been so compelling as someone else's, but they really like your company because they have a great relationship with the people. So it is about asking for that hard to digest. Please, can you tell us what we didn't do well? And please, can you tell us what we could have done better?
You nailed it there, Kathryn, because there is a lot of emphasis as you called about, let's do strategy. Let's do capture, let's do pre-sales, let's do sales, let's do proposals. But once the proposal gets done, we simply look at the result and we say, oh yeah, we lost it. Yeah, we did it, completely forgetting. And then we move to the next customer doing the same cycle again. Whereas, as you beautifully pointed out just now, we can sit down, because from experience, I haven't done that with all the bids, but at least 10% of the bids that I have done, I've gone back to the customers and asked them, hey, what did we do right? Whether we won or wrong, what did we do right? At least it helps you to see whether this collateral that you use, this pricing that you use, is the right pricing, right collateral, so that you can go on and use it again and again. It's amazing how very less people talk about this. And there is a lot of talk about capture, a lot of talk about this, a lot of talk about that, a lot of proposal, exec summaries, and all these things. But this core things that we are talking just now, which is like, go back and sit down, get the breakdown, and just see what went right, what went wrong, and use it to the next one. Or maybe the same customer might have come back with a different tender in the next year or so. So it's all adds up. This is fascinating, Kathryn. Thank you for sharing. Let's go back to the very basics. So, and just going to this now, we have submitted a bid and we got a result, and we are asking feedback from the person. In your own mind, who has been a big beacon of hope for content library knowledge management for some years now, why is it important to ask for feedback?
Well, it's important to ask for feedback because it gives you a roadmap of what you can do better. it allows us to see what's important to change quickly. It makes us realize that maybe our social value answers are really great, but we're really lacking in the way we approach something or our account management. And maybe that's because, hey, you know what, we've seen social value is a hot topic these days. So that's what we're spending all our focus on, but we're neglecting some of the other stuff. And it comes back to that, well, maybe we won on price this time, but our quality wasn't that good. And that stops us from saying, oh, well, we won this bid, so let's just use all that content. Our content might actually have been really poor, and we scored better on content on another bid and lost on price, which doesn't mean we lost the bid. Yes, we didn't win that opportunity, but our content was really good. So it's about understanding that just because you lost on price doesn't mean your content was rubbish. And just because you won on price doesn't mean your content was great. And by allowing us to put that roadmap back into saying, okay, you know what, the last 4 bids we've submitted, our account methodology, we're just not nailing it. Then we can say, okay, let's do a workshop on account methodology with our account managers. Let's ask them what exactly we do, why we do it. And it comes back to my thing about what you have to include in content. You have to say what it is, how you do it, why your customer needs that, and where you've done it before. So then you can sit down and say to your account managers, for example, this was your bad, you're not winning on this account management stuff. Nobody understands what your account management is or why it's better than anybody else's. You can sit down and say to them, okay, so what do we do? How do we do it? Why do we do it this way? What are the benefits? And where have we done it before? Because as soon as you can start saying benefits and providing examples, you've suddenly got an awful lot more scoring power, whatever it is that you're doing. And then by identifying, oh, our social value is top of the pops, we get 10 out of 10 out of that, or 8 out of 10 on that. But our account management is bad. Well, we don't need to spend more time on social value at the moment, but we do need to spend the time on something else.
Totally, Kat. And now I've got the feedback. I know that I have the spreadsheet of refreshing content, and in my own mind, I know these are the dates that I need to refresh it, etc. And I've got this feedback now. Will I go and change my plan a little bit to just get, because this is an important thing, or will I add this part of my overall content planning exercise? What would you suggest?
I would say it depends on how, I want to say how bad the feedback is. Yeah. If the feedback has been particularly bad off the last, say, 3 or 4 bids, I would say don't wait until the next quarter, which is when it's booked in, to fix it. Fix it now. Switch it out with something else that's doing better. If it's just sort of like, okay, well, we could make brief improvements here or brief improvements there, go and do them when it's their turn, sort of thing. The other good thing to do is always to go and annotate the content that you've got. We use Word, write comments down the side, highlight the pieces that might need a tweak. And if you can't get to it now, at least when somebody else opens it to reuse it, they can say, oh, we've had some feedback that we really need to put this in, so maybe I need to do this. Once that content, once that comment's been dealt with, delete the comment. But until you've had a chance to deal with it, leave it in that source document so that at least you know that that's something you need to look at. Because yes, sometimes we are just so busy we don't have time to fix our content, but at least if we've made a comment in a central location where everybody can see it, then we've got a chance of improving as we go. And then we might get feedback next week, on this bid that we've just submitted, where we incorporated those comments, that, hey, we scored 8 instead of 5. And then we can copy and paste that piece of better content over the old content and say, hey, we've done our update.
Nice. So I think gradually, if we go back and refresh what we just discussed now, Kathryn, here we go, guys. You are doing bids every week, every month, every year, whatever. But you at least save it in a folder of all the past bids. But wherever possible, at least have a monthly, half a days or something where you could kind of slice and dice information into 3 levels, so that it's easy for you to just get to at least the top 80% of the repeatable content that you get from there. That's done. Third level is every bid, don't just save the bid, go back and get the feedback and then prepare your refreshing calendar accordingly, not just based on your own thought process of when I need to refresh, but also incorporate feedback submission inside part of the portal as well.
Exactly.
So now I realize, Kathryn, that, oh my God, this is too much of a job and I need to appoint a content manager or a content coordinator or somebody. Is there any kind of attributes of a good content manager?
I think it helps if they are able to write and they might have a proposal background. It helps. It depends exactly what you want them to do. If you want them just to manage the process, then you just need somebody who is exceptionally organized and really good at following through on updating everything. So a really good administrator can do that. If you're wanting that person to be responsible for tweaking and amending the content, then you need someone who can write as well. And that's not to say that your administrator can't learn to write and improve things, but I think you need to be quite specific about what you want this person to do. Do you just want them to manage the process, or do you want them to become involved in that content curation and development? If that's what you want, you need someone with a writing background, or you need to send them on a training course. You know, there are writing training courses out there. I'd love it if there was a content specific one, as I said earlier. Maybe that's my next project. But, you know, decide exactly what you want from this person, and whatever you do, don't allow them to get caught up in the bid cycle. So as in responding to bids, because that's where bid teams often fall short. They start out, they have an administrator or someone who's responsible for that piece of work. That person becomes more bid savvy and is a real asset to actually writing responses. And before you know it, they're a bid manager or a bid writer. And your content's been left behind again because you've stolen this really good person to write really good responses for you. But now your foundations are crumbling because you're not maintaining your building anymore.
Wow, that's a typical story in any company. You're right. I mean, like you just find a dedicated resource to manage it. Then you realize, oh, this is part of my overhead. I better utilize her on bids, utilize her or him on bids.
Exactly.
And then you realize the core purpose of this role is just to maintain the library, but then that get backward. But that's is there any kind of what do you call standard for a good content? I know the customer is giving us a feedback, as you rightly said, but in our own way, is there any way that if we are building content now, like 10 out of 10 is the best content? Obviously, there are multiple passes that a content goes through before it hits that mark, Kathryn. In your mind, what should be a content for, say, a starting content? You don't have anything now, just build this. This is 3 marks. You have something now, build it up with XYZ, that's 5 marks. Then you build it up 8. Is there any kind of little assessment guidance that you can give to people?
I think the first thing would be to have a look and see, are you writing this actively or passively? So if you use the active voice, it's much more powerful, and you tend not to write your own company name in there all the time. Correct. You tend to write the client's name or say you or your, and speak to what they're going to get from you, which is about, that means you sort of can't avoid the benefit statement. So this comes back to, you also need to describe, we come back to my what, how, why, and where questions again. You talk about what it is, how it works, why it works, and where you've done it before. So those 4 things you need to start thinking about. You might not have a where yet because it might be something really new, but you might be able to speak why you think it would be a useful thing to have. And include that, because very often we're so aware of what it is, what the amazing benefit of our product is, or our solution, or our service, or our process, we forget to tell the client. And they don't necessarily figure it out. It's not always intuitive to say, because their account manager is multi-talented and multi-skilled at doing things, they can also help on the service desk. Or, because they do such and such, we're not going to have to worry about this. We don't always see that from the content. So you have to be quite explicit. And I always say to people, if you start your content, write in bullet points to make sure you've covered off those points. You can always turn the bullet point into prose. It's much easier to turn bullet points into prose than, have this whole big chunk of prose that you've got to try and figure out what's going on with. So that, I'd say, is where you start. And then get someone else to read it. Someone who's not you, because we all go blind to what we've written, whether it's our spelling mistakes or our grammar, or the fact that, it just makes sense to us. And so asking someone else to read it or be the client helps a lot. And what else can I say that I think would be really important from reviewing your content? I would say be brutally honest with yourself and try and make it as few words as possible. The shorter, just because you've got 2,000 words does not mean you need to write 2,000 words. Okay, it doesn't mean you need to write 500 either. Let's be reasonable, somewhere in the middle. But don't write every single word you've got if you don't need it. You need to make sure that you've said what you need to say as clearly and concisely as you can without overdoing it. Because very often people go, I've only written 1,500 words. I really need to write another 500 words. No, you don't. If you have said everything there is to say, that's fine.
Well said there, Kathryn. Well said. I think that's always the question. Time and time again, as you know, we always get this project. Hey, we have this database of submissions that we have in slides, in Excel sheets, in Word documents, and some of the informations are the same, but we have repurposed them in different formats, etc. We just want to bring them all together into one format, into one collateral, etc. We hear this all the time. What advice would you give people who have been doing it, especially larger companies who tend to work in different geographies, and they somehow create their own content? At some point they realize they are actually, it's the same story that you mentioned about the marketing versus bids. The bid teams in different countries also work in silos and they create their own things as well. Any advice to these people who end up creating their own stuff in multiple formats, then gets severely overwhelmed that they need to go back and do an entire big exercise to bring it all down to one?
I think the first thing to do is to create an indexable log of what you've got, particularly if there are multiple formats. And where you've got multiple languages, multiple countries, maybe decide which country is going to be the source or which language is going to be the source. So let's say you have your headquarters in the UK. Right. Most of our content is going to be written in English. But we might have an office in Germany who has to write a whole lot of content in German, for example. Let's try and make sure that all the content is written in English and then translated into another language. That way, when there's an update, it always gets done to the source content and then translated out, because it's quite easy in a multilingual situation to start updating local content and forgetting that the source content is not amended, simply because we're busy using something. So we need to have a little process around, we've changed this. We need to make sure it goes back into the original source, and we need to let everybody know that we've changed this aspect. It can be as simple as that. So let's say our company works on the basis of, hey, Kathryn's in the UK and she writes all the English content and she maintains the source content. Great. Joseph in Germany keeps a track of what's been translated into German. If he makes any changes, he sends them back to Kathryn, who says, okay, I'll change the English content, and I will let Francesca know in Spain that I've made changes. If Francesca makes changes, she sends them to me and I let somebody else know, so that the changes can be made again to the other content, if that makes sense. If it's such a big company that everything gets translated centrally and there's a central translation sort of hub, then it's a very different kettle of fish. You just send it in and say, okay, please amend everybody's content accordingly. But it's about communicating again what you've changed, what you've updated, without because what does happen is that not everybody speaks all the languages, so you might not notice it or know about it. So it's very much about talking to your colleagues, and potentially building something into your bid process that says, okay, every quarter we have a sit down with our bid teams across the globe and say, guess what? We've had this happen in our location. We provide this service in addition to other services. Have you guys got the information? We can use the same processes that marketing do to keep the website updated. We just tend to forget about them in bids because, well, bids is sales, isn't it? And because bids has only recently become a real job. You know, we've got accreditations now, we've got certifications, we've got all sorts of things, and more we see roles and jobs advertised with must have APMP accreditation. Guess what? There's this whole organization that does stuff, which allows us to now say, you know what, best practice in our industry is XYZ. We didn't have that before. Whereas marketing would have said, I'm a chartered marketer, we need these things in place. So we're now maturing where we can actually say, I'm a certified proposal professional, and this is what we need in place. And people need to start listening. So hopefully content will get included in all of that wonderful best practice at some point.
Definitely, Kathryn, and we will always drive that with you on this. So, Kathryn, I think one of the very important point that you mentioned is sometimes because of all the tools that are available in the market, it's quite interesting. When I spoke to Dr. Tom Sant, part of the podcast, he mentioned the earliest proposal automation tool existed in 1989 in an Excel spreadsheet, and it evolved over the years. So many people are just jumping into proposal tools without having any sort of basic foundation in place. So what advice would you give people? Okay, you have built all these things first. Ensure you know what content, when content, how the overall governance is going to work, using SharePoint because that's really available, etc., etc. Then you decide whether you want to go on something. What advice would you give to people who are just going from 0 to 10 and then complain about, I'm not getting the best value for money on these tools, it's waste of money and other things. So what do you think they should do as a step-by-step process?
I think, and from having had a lot of discussions with a lot of proposal automation providers, I think it's really important that as an organization, if you're going to look at any sort of automation, you know what you want to get out of it. Are you doing this because you have to generate 60 proposals a week? Or are you doing this because you want to make sure that everything is consistent? Or, what is your rationale behind this? And then once you've gone out to tender and you've spoken to all the different providers you want to, and you've put this out in an ITT, and you've selected your proposal automation provider, keep talking to them. If there's something that you're battling with, let them know, because the chances are quite good that they've got other clients who are battling with the same thing. I think the other thing that's really important for organizations to think about, and it does depend on the maturity of your systems, is are you happy with having your content in a database that is linked only to that tool? Or would you rather have your content that, managed on your own systems and a tool that links into those systems? Both of them they're really good reasons for doing it, but either way. But you need to know what works for you as an organization. If you're a big enough organization that can afford to have lots of different databases and people to manage those databases, because I think this is the other thing that worries me with proposal automation, is that we think that because we put an automation tool in place, we can save a person. We forget that very often to manage these tools, we need a person to administer it. No HR system is going to go in there and say, oh, we don't need an HR administrator to manage it. But for proposal automation, we tend to forget that we might need a person to manage it. We think it's an answer to all our problems. And I've seen it in too many companies where they think that this is going to resolve the problem, and they now don't need to monitor their content because somehow the tool is going to be able to pick up what content they've got and what they've recently reused. Again, we still need to evaluate. Is the content that we used in that last proposal, yes, it came out of our automation tool. Is that content good? What did it score? have we fed back our scores into the automation tool content, the content we've saved in our database? So we never lose that having to update our content. And yes, I know a lot of the tools do actually aggregate and work out which is the most recent, most used, most popular piece of content. But is that piece of content the content that scored the highest, or is it just the one that people have copied and pasted the most?
Nice, Kathryn. I never thought that we'll be talking about content for 45, 50 minutes, but it's fascinating. And we are at the end of the talk, Kathryn. So going back to the very first subject that we discussed, Kathryn, we touched what is the content, and then you just kindly defined it. Then we talked about bit libraries, to the 3 layers, to the Excel spreadsheets of a refresh calendar, to the feedback that you wanted, lessons learned. And there are so many nuggets that you shared here. And also, how do you define what's the best standard for a proposal? Be honest and set your own marks, etc. Finally, the last question before we close. In this whole talk, if there is this one thing that you want people to do, take action, what is it, Kathryn?
Don't be afraid to fight for the things you need in your proposal process. If you feel you need better content and time to make that content better, say that to your managers. Take a business case to somebody up high in the organization that says, we need to have a day a month to focus on this. It will make us better because X, Y, Z. Don't be afraid to stop and ask for what you need.
Well said, Kathryn. That's very powerful. Kathryn, as always, an enlightening conversation. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining, sharing your time. As I always say, it's been an absolute privilege to have you with us at Scribble Talk Round 2. There is more to come. Wish you and family all the good health, Kathryn. Speak to you, and we will do all we can to help build up your content writing course and take it to the wider mass. And we will do that for you. Thank you, Kathryn. Stay healthy, stay happy, and do your best.
And to you too, Bhaskar. Thanks very much for the opportunity again.